Hey everyone, welcome to the show. Ever think about an industry built on a plant, like something that was once totally demonized, now being worth billions?
Yeah.
Well, that's the crazy ride we're diving into today with Catch a Fire.
Okay.
It's a nonfiction book, and it's all about the Canadian cannabis industry.
Interesting.
Before we get too far, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss any more deep dives. The book is by Kaplan, and it takes us from, like, the really early days of medical marijuana activism, all the way to, like, the huge growth and crazy struggles after it was legalized.
Oh, wow.
We'll drop the Amazon link down in the description, so get ready for some wild personalities, crazy stories from the black market and, like, the boardroom,
Uh-huh.
and some big ethical questions about turning a plant into a multi-billion-dollar industry.
It's crazy how that happens, right? What gets me about this book is it really captures how ambitious and risky those early pioneers were. They weren't just building companies, they were challenging the whole system and
Yeah.
changing everything.
Okay, so let's start with those early activists who, like, kick things off. The book starts with Terry Parker. He had epilepsy. And his legal battle back in the 90s kind of accidentally made the way for Canada's medical marijuana program.
Oh, wow. The crazy part is his lawyer, Aaron Harnett, he didn't even use cannabis himself.
Really?
He wanted to, and this is a quote, make grandma not afraid of marijuana.
Oh, that's great.
He was all about changing how people thought about it and making it seem legit, especially for medical reasons.
So it wasn't just about legal rights. It was about changing mind, too.
Exactly.
That's super interesting. So remember that whole government-grown weed thing?
Oh, yeah, the MR program with Prairie Plant Systems, or PPS, growing weed in an old mine shaft.
I'd forgotten about that.
It's wild to think the government spent millions on weed that, everyone thought was worse than black market stuff.
It's crazy, right? Like, the rules and the reality were totally different.
Yeah.
This is where those licensed producers come in, right?
Mhm.
Those LPs. Companies like Tweed, which later became Canopy Growth, Metrum, Afria. That's when the big personalities really jump out.
Yeah.
Bruce Linton, Chucker Fissy, Terry Booth, Cole Cacciavolani. They all had different ideas for the industry.
They did.
Bruce Linton especially, he comes across as a total force in the book,
Yeah.
like a master promoter. And he knew how to build a brand. There's this crazy story about him smuggling cannabis roots and seeds on a private plane
What?
to get around the rules.
No way.
What do you think made him take that kind of risk?
I think it was those regulations, they were so strict and the industry was growing so fast. Linton saw a way to make things happen and he wasn't afraid to bend the rules a little.
That makes sense. It was a time of big change, and taking risks paid off. So how did Justin Trudeau's promise to legalize change the game?
Oh, it was huge, especially compared to what Stephen Harper thought. Trudeau's promise made the whole industry seem legit. Investors went crazy. This fringe movement was suddenly mainstream. Billions of dollars poured in. Valuations went through the roof.
It's wild how Canada went from this small medical program to a global phenomenon. What do you think caused that?
Well, you had politicians who wanted to legalize. People were more and more okay with cannabis. And you had these really smart entrepreneurs who saw the opportunity. Canada became the model for other countries everyone was watching. And the money came pouring in.
It wasn't all smooth sailing, though, right?
Definitely not.
The book introduces us to Gabriel Brego. He was a seller, and he publicly questioned what Afria was doing that caused their value to drop by $1 billion.
Wow. Grego exposed how risky the industry's growth was. He made people question how transparent and accountable these companies really were. And he reminded everyone that the boom wouldn't last forever.
Legalization itself, while it was a huge deal, also brought a bunch of new problems.
Definitely.
And some stuff no one expected.
Totally.
The book goes deep into how complicated legalization was, like how slow Ontario was to open stores, how the black market was still around, and all the hurdles legal producers had to jump through. It was way more chaotic than people thought.
It was.
The story of cafes, that illegal dispensary chain in Toronto, really got to me.
Yeah.
They just ignored the law, even when the authorities tried to shut them down with concrete blocks.
It's crazy how they got away with that.
How could they operate so openly?
Well, I think Cafe shows a few things. First, people loved them. They had loyal customers. And the public was on their side. It shows how out of touch the laws were with the real cannabis culture. And second, the authorities weren't really enforcing the rules. Maybe they didn't have the resources. Or maybe they were turning a blind eye to certain things.
I see.
Cafe's story shows how hard it is to control something that's already established underground.
It makes you think. Then there's Jackson Flynn. His story about working in an unlicensed dispensary shows us just how dangerous the illegal market is and how much cash is involved.
So much money.
It's a world away from those corporate LPs, isn't it?
Yeah, those firsthand accounts are so important. They remind us that there are real people behind all the headlines. While some were celebrating billions, others were risking their necks in the black market. Legalization tried to control it all, but it was way more complicated than that.
Speaking of worlds apart, the book talks about how Bruce Linton and Terry Booth fell from grace.
Like a tragedy.
They built these huge companies and then got kicked out.
What happened?
What led to their downfall?
I think it was a mix of ambition and just like overconfidence. They wanted to grow fast, and there was so much money available. But their way of doing things didn't match what investors wanted, or the reality of the market as it matured. Their stories show the tension between the people who built the industry and the demands of Wall Street.
It's wild how the cannabis world is like a Shakespearean play.
Totally.
Then we have Sebastian St. Louis. He wanted to consolidate the market, buying up companies, which led to the Tilray-Afria merger. What makes him different?
I think St. Louis is a different kind of leader, more strategic, more focused on the long game. Linton and Booth wanted to grow fast and dominate, but St. Louis understands that the future is about consolidation and making a profit that lasts.
It's fascinating how different personalities change the industry.
It is.
In the middle of all this corporate drama, there's Redecan. They did things differently, focusing on pre-rolls and partnering with the Montour family, who own a big tobacco company. How did they succeed when others were struggling?
Redecan shows how important it is to adapt and make the right partnerships. They found a niche, pre-rolls, and they used the Montour's expertise in tobacco. They show that understanding the market and making smart alliances can be just as powerful as big dreams.
They prove there's more than one way to win.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that the book doesn't shy away from the ethical stuff. We see the debates about social justice, the exploitation of workers, and the environmental impact of growing all that weed.
It's not all about business and money.
Nope.
It's about people and the planet.
Absolutely. It's about responsibility, making sure that a new industry benefits everyone, not just a few lucky people.
So why should you care about all this?
I think there are lessons here for everyone, not just about cannabis. It's about ambition, innovation, risk, and the human side of business. It's about the challenges of building something new, the temptation of easy money, and the importance of ethics.
It shows that every industry has booms and busts, and that even the biggest visionaries can make mistakes. This book puts us right in the middle of a huge moment in Canadian history and asks important questions about the future of cannabis, not just in Canada, but globally.
I totally agree. And Catch a Fire shows how business, politics, and social change are all connected. This story is way bigger than just cannabis.
Absolutely. And here's a question that sticks with you after you finish the book. Do you think legal cannabis actually achieved what it set out to do? Creating a safe and fair industry?
That's for each reader to decide, based on what they learn in Catch a Fire.
And that's where we'll leave it for today. Be sure to come back for part 2 of our deep dive into Catch a Fire. It's a captivating look at the world of Canadian cannabis.
It's amazing how it went from, helping people get medical access to this crazy financial game.
Right.
It was less about the plant itself and more about market share and billions of dollars and impressing Wall Street.
It's like they forgot where it all started.
Yeah.
The book really shows how much power investment bankers and short sellers had in shaping the whole industry.
They did. Those guys coming in from outside the cannabis world, they had their own agenda. Remember Chip, that banker? He bragged about making over $150,000 in one day just from a cannabis deal.
Wow.
That kind of money changes things.
It attracts a certain type.
Definitely.
It's wild how the people who were skeptical at first ended up fueling the whole boom and maybe even causing the bust.
And the book doesn't sugarcoat the bad stuff. It talks about companies like CanTrust, where the pressure to please investors led to some shady things.
Like Nick Lalonde, building fake walls to hide illegal grow rooms.
That's crazy.
It shows what happens when people get too ambitious, especially when there's so much money at stake.
It's not just the companies, though. The book also shows how individual investors got hurt. Like Allison Gordon's massage therapist lost a ton of money in the CanTrust mess.
It makes it real. Those personal stories, they show the real-world consequences of all this. It makes you wonder who really benefited from legalization. Was it the patients who fought for medical access, or the corporations and investors who made a fortune?
That's a tough question, with no easy answers. Legalization created winners and losers, and changed everything in ways no one predicted.
While some people were celebrating billions and going global, others were struggling to keep up with the changes. The black market didn't disappear. Stores were slow to open, and legal producers faced all kinds of hurdles and financial problems.
There's two different worlds. On one side, you had the big companies fighting for market share, and on the other, you had the underground dispensaries and growers still going strong.
Like Gage and Toronto, they just did whatever they wanted, even with the law trying to stop them.
They challenged the idea that legalization would just wipe out the cannabis culture. Instead, it just changed the battlefield. It makes you wonder if the government's focus on control actually made the transition harder.
It's a fascinating case study. And then you have legal retailers like Fire and Flower. They were stuck dealing with bureaucracy and supply problems.
They show how tough it was to navigate the new rules and compete with the black market.
The book does a great job of showing the human side of it all, like Terry Booth getting frustrated with Ontario's slow rollout of stores and his outburst at that conference in Vegas.
Oh yeah, that was classic.
It shows how much pressure these guys were under. Billion-dollar valuations, investors breathing down their necks, competition everywhere. Even veterans like Linton and Booth made mistakes that cost them their jobs.
They're a cautionary tale about getting too ambitious and not adapting.
And it's interesting to see how different personalities shaped the industry. Linton was the showman, Booth was the stray shooter, and St. Louis is the strategist. Their clashes and partnerships make the story so interesting.
It's like a drama, with these big characters, their ambitions and flaws, and how their fates are tied to the industry's fate.
And the book ends on a cliffhanger. The industry is still changing, with the black market, regulations, and the pressure to make money.
Even with St. Louis' consolidation, we don't know if his vision will work out.
It leaves you wondering what's next for Canadian cannabis.
Will it ever escape its past? Will it become a normal part of the economy?
It's a big question for our listeners to think about. What do you think the future holds?
Yeah, it really is the billion-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
Catch a Fire leaves you thinking about, like, all the potential, but also all the uncertainty.
Yeah, it's like the industry's at a crossroads, trying to figure out how to be both counterculture and corporate.
Right.
And the decisions they make will affect everyone, not just the businesses, but all of Canada.
One of the big things the book shows is this struggle between the government wanting control and the reality and how cannabis culture already existed.
Right, the government wanted a really regulated market, but cannabis was already part of the underground economy for, like, forever. So it makes sense that things got messy. It's like they were trying to force something that didn't fit. The government was probably thinking about alcohol and tobacco, but cannabis is totally different.
And Catch a Fire really shows that. We see those legal producers trying to follow all the rules, the black market still being a problem, and everyone arguing about the social and health effects of using cannabis.
This isn't just a Canadian thing either. The book talks about how legalization in Canada affected the whole world.
Canada was the first big economy to legalize recreational cannabis, and everyone was watching to see that would happen. The good and the bad of Canada's model have influenced other countries, thinking about doing the same thing.
So as we finish up our deep dive into Catch a Fire, what do you think about the future of the Canadian cannabis industry?
It's really hard to say. There are so many things changing, what people want, the rules, the black market.
It's definitely still early days, and who knows what's going to happen next.
But one thing's for sure, the story isn't over yet.
Catch a Fire is a great way to understand how we got here and what might happen in the future. It's a must-read for anyone who's interested in this industry.
It shows that even though things are changing fast, there are still important lessons to learn about ambition, risk, and the human side of things.
So if you enjoyed our deep dive into Catch a Fire, tell us what you think in the comments. We want to hear your take on the book, the industry, and the future of cannabis in Canada.
And as always, if you liked this episode, share with everyone.
Thanks for joining us on this exploration of the Canadian cannabis industry. We'll be back with another deep dive soon. Until then, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those questions coming.